the first time that you come to them with a bottoms up budget and they're used to going top down, it's going to be
Mhm.
awkward. There's learning, there's communication, there's all sorts of things that need to happen. But one of the fundaments of that is trust. Do they trust that you're actually going to be a good steward of the money?
I think we should talk about it.
The Margeteers.
Hi, Marg. Happy New Year.
Hi, Margaret. Happy New Year.
Thank you so much. So we are back. We are here again. I think we really enjoy the conversations we had last year. And I think we have some great things planned for this year. We really want to serve this community to really share our insights, opinions, questions about how to make the most of strategic marketing in an ever more spread out and, dare I say, convoluted channels world. So we have some thoughts. If you ever have thoughts or comments or questions, always feel free to put them in comments, send a message, let us know. This is really about having a good time to just talk about what's on our mind. How is marketing feeling today? How is digital marketing aligning to business objectives, helping people grow, and doing so in a smart, strategic, and, dare I say, fun way? Dare I say fun, Mark? Is that okay?
If it's not fun, what are we here for?
What are we here for?
So it's great to have the joy of marketing. There we go.
The joy of marketing. we'll bring an appetizer every time as well from a Julia's standpoint. Well, it's that time of year again for most companies that maybe their fiscal year is aligned to calendars, and it is all about setting budgets. It's about setting KPIs and OKRs and what are we going to achieve? What are we going to do at the end of December 2026 to look back and say, this was a successful year, or these were the learnings and so forth. And what comes along is a wonderful CFO who is going to say, here's the budget you have, and now go for it. So let's just have a chat to be like how we're planning our own budgets, how we're planning some budgets for clients, how, thoughts on budgets, thoughts on everything, because I think that you are going to share something that is going to be rare. Let's go.
I work with a lot of early stage companies, right? So they're either startup, Series A, Series B, and really the marketing budget is set in the context of a pro forma, typically for how they're shopping the business around to investors, and they need to show an operational budget and the use of funds. And almost universally, that winds up being a top-down budget from, the C-suite, which is usually a percentage of sales. And a consequence of that often is that in the early stages of the business, there's not much marketing budget because there's not a lot of cash flow with the company yet.
Right.
And, that presents its own challenges. But at the end of the day, I kind of take a different point of view for how to handle marketing spends in early stage companies. Okay. I view the budget as a suggestion.
Okay.
And not as reality, because the bottom line is when you're doing that early market outreach, there's a lot of experimentation.
Yes.
It's hard to forecast experimentation because you don't have a crystal ball. You don't know what's going to actually resonate. But also, once you do figure out through great testing, once you do figure out what works, as long as your cost to acquire that customer is a reasonable cost, you can amplify that ad infinitum. That can be something that can scale very quickly and might throw the entire financial model off because you're doing your customer acquisition on steroids, and because the cost of marketing is accelerating on a basically a parallel path to the cost of customer acquisition and the incoming revenue, it means that that number could be much larger than you originally had planned in the pro forma, but it's okay because it's
Right.
delivering that top line revenue. So instead, what I like to do is say, okay, I understand that we need to have a budget for the pro forma. That makes perfect sense. But can we agree instead that what we're going to do is we're going to experiment? We're going to
Yeah.
spend some money. We're going to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And instead of setting a hardline budget, let's set a cost per customer acquisition that we're comfortable with. So it's like if we want to spend 5% or 10% of the cost of customer acquisition on marketing, let's use that as the metric instead of a specific dollar amount. It's a mind shift change for finance folks.
Totally. So you'll say like what I actually want is a range of CPA, and then I'll get back to you.
In practice, right? So it's like what you're actually operating to versus
Right.
what a pro forma says.
Okay.
And so if you can have that kind of agreement with the CFO, your comptrollers, et cetera, whoever it is that you're coordinating with on the budget, you can say, okay, I understand we need to have the pro forma. We have to have a dollar amount on the pro forma. We want to be smart about it. We want to be good shepherds of the company's limited resources.
Right.
But at the same time, if we find something that works, we don't want to throttle it just because we set the budget at a certain dollar amount.
Here's I mean, maybe I'm coming up with like outlier situations because I really do like this, and I think it makes sense and so forth. What is the situation though? And there are some activities, and I'm thinking right now about live events and sponsored events and packages and negotiations that you're going to do as far as like, okay, we're going to do a couple of things here. I mean, there is that proportion where you do need to decide sometimes a channel of I'm going to put X amount to be live events. And maybe it's based on historical. So maybe you've done your CPA last year and you know that that's going to bring in X amount. And so therefore this is a, dare I say, reliable channel that you're going to do. Maybe I've just answered the question I was going to ask you, but is that the thing as far as saying, okay, look, this is now reliable, but also here's a set amount that we have to commit to now. And because of this channel, because of this aspect of it, it's going to mean that somewhere in September, I'm going to have less flexibility for experimentation to finish out the
for sure.
calendar year, with an ethos of learning and experimentation as your foundational budgeting purview. How do you balance in those things that you have to commit now that are going to make experimenting later harder?
Yeah. So really, it's a 2 or 3 part answer. Part of it is if you do have those historicals and you know what the performance of a event was, then you can make that decision whether or not that hit the mark and whether or not you're going to do it that upcoming year. That makes total sense when you have that history. A lot of times working with really early companies, you don't necessarily have the history.
Right.
And so you don't have that data set. I think then it really becomes, and again, rather than top down, I like to do it bottoms up and say, okay, we need to meet our customers where they are. Here's the ICP. Here's where they are going to be in volume. And here's an opportunity for us to go to 2 events in Q1. There's nothing really great in Q2. Q3 has these 3. And literally plan it out like a calendar and say, okay, Mr. CFO, you've given me like a lot of times what they'll do is they give you a set amount quarter by quarter or month by month where they're like, here is your budget. And the reality is marketing doesn't budget like this. Marketing budgets like this.
Oh, let's talk about that for a second.
Okay.
About seasonality, because I have been very lucky so far as for the CFO's portions and perspective to be, here's the chunk. How are you going to spend it? But I have seen, it was actually the first time I've ever seen it, like an organization of a budget of saying, this is our chunk and therefore this is what we have every single month. And it was a bit of an education to say like, this isn't our gas, this isn't our electricity. We can fluctuate it. I like to always have a branch of always on activities.
For
Some
sure.
of those have some pay
Fundamentals.
aspect to it that has to, there's also a BAU budget as far as like the tools that we use. And like, maybe, yes, we are using AI, we're doing these different aspects, but the tools still cost money.
Mhm.
You know, you and I are on different levels of ChatGPT, for example, because there's different power uses or insights or where you lay your hat, but equally at the same time, even with the AI, as of mid-December, I'm not sure when you're listening to this, but like just as of, you know, mid-December of 2025, Gemini's at the top, right? And then like Cloud. So you kind of have to be invested in all of them to see who's performing to the needs that you need them at that kind of space. So yes, there is this like always on, there is this tooling if your tooling is part of your budget. But do you have tips for other marketers out there who might be trying to explain to quote unquote the powers that be about seasonal spending or non-traditional, like, you know, if we take away your experimentation discussion or adding it into it, is how would you have that conversation with the person that holds the purse to help them understand that marketing isn't equal every month?
I like to do my own pro forma. I like to do my own line item budget and show the peaks and valleys. And then if there's the conversation about, okay, Mark, well, September is really too heavy, like that's going to be a challenge for us, then it will be, let's talk about what the trade-offs are.
So, but like somebody's saying like that's the challenge for us, does that come from because it is a smaller startup company, maybe there's cash flow, is that the issue, or is it an education understanding? Like, what are you trying to work out when they say that's a problem for them?
In my case, it's usually because it's a early stage company.
Mm-hmm.
And we're still figuring out what the magic spend is, what the magic alchemy is of the budget. And there are unknowns. And by definition, unknowns make finance folks uncomfortable. And, you know, it's just the nature. And that's a really good contrast to have, actually, because it holds you accountable as the marketer to be able to substantiate the reason why you're asking for that. It's actually a really good exercise to have that tension between finance and marketing, because I do think that you wind up with a better result. But by having a line item, like you were saying, you've got your table stakes, you've got your fundamentals that you have to have, just part of doing business, your MarTech stack, etc.
Yeah.
You have to have that there. But then literally having line item budget and here showing, here's where we're going to be experimenting with messaging and positioning. Here's where we're going to be doing our inaugural event for this product that we're releasing this year. And really do it, you know, plan by plan. Because I find when you do bottoms up and you substantiate with strategy and precision what it is that you're trying to do, it eliminates most of the objections that finance might have, where they're like, okay, but we've budgeted this flat amount. Well, it's just not reality. Just with your home budget isn't always a flat amount. You have a car repair you weren't expecting, or you have vacation planned. Same idea. There's going to be peaks and valleys, just like there's peaks and valleys with the sales closes as well. Line items, these pro forma budgets, they're meant to be a guideline.
Okay.
I just don't think of them as set in stone. And at the end of the day, if I really want to do something spectacular, I count on my ability to pitch it and to get the approval.
To get the extra amount later.
To get the extra amount. Yeah. Yeah.
And then how do you report on the experiments that have given you lots of learning, so you know you're not going to do that thing again next year, but to a financier's eyes says we've lost, you know, there was no ROI on that?
Yeah. Yeah. I think part of it is making the case in the beginning. You make the case in the beginning that it's an experiment, and that the output that you're desiring is the learning. And if you right size it, you learn it without a big loss, because you're fine tuning it. In the moment that you discover that something's not working, you should be pivoting and enhancing and changing anyway, so that you can limit those kinds of things.
And then slightly off, what is your perspective about aligning's not maybe the right word, but where's the negotiation? That's kind of the better word for discussing kind of marketing versus sales budget when things are shared budgets, or
versus shared budget.
do you ever have that I mean, I have that conversation, I guess, is that like going to, when you're doing an event, there's that initial discussion of like, if I paid for the booth, marketing gets all the leads. If we're attending, maybe sales gets all the leads. Like, or we want to do this event, we're going to get this, but because of this experimentation, something else, some of sales budget has to come into it, but it's still our initial. Like, do you ever have those conversations? Do you ever have to go to the sales leader to be like, hey, you should invest in this, and we're going to both ride off into the sunset?
Definitely. So in terms of my working style, it's always done in collaboration with sales.
Totally.
So I know you're wired the same way, right? It needs to be cohesive. There has to be unification there, or you wind up with an unhealthy tension between sales and marketing. So if everybody's in it together and they agree on the approach, then you actually wind up with an ally that helps you get the budget approval or get the spend approval through the finance arm. So I think that's really the magic sauce, is if there's alignment between sales and marketing, you become partners in pitching that and getting the approval. At the end of the day, they want the results as well, and want to support you in trying to create those results for them.
So I agree with everything that you've said. I like it. I have a slightly different approach. So how do I say this? I guess it's great to not believe in budget, but then at the same time, you still have to do it, right?
Right. There's practical implications. Right.
So I think there's a lot of things of like, I'd love to just say, this is great. This is great. I think there's the core information. Is there cash flow aspects? Are there points of saying, if I unlocked this channel, can we invest more into it? Because there's a lag. I think a lot of the clients I work with, and spending 2 decades in B2B tech, it means that the sales process is long, right? So we're investing into a multitude of channels and activities that are trying to usher in what can be 18, 24-month sales cycles sometimes, right? Unless that's you occasionally, the thing that kind of always messes up budgets is you'll have that one client that knew specifically, like they were already in consideration phase. They knew they had a problem. They've researched, they found you, and they're ready to implement you in the next 2 months. And then the rest of the business was like, how do we find them? And you're like, well, they were the outlier of it, right? Or we keep doing what we are doing because they were able to find us easily in their needs cycle, right? Because it is that definition of like 95% of in B2B procurement is they're not looking right now, right? So there's all this nurture, and I believe strongly in email nurture and these kind of programs that are kind of keeping people abreast of your solutions and so forth. But there is a lot of, dare I say, budget that's going to go to not revenue this year. It is that like the long and the short of it, of saying, okay, this is how we're going to organize the now. This thing is going to be next year's impact. So maybe the CPA that we're going for this year is going to be impacted, but that means we'll get to January next year and you'll have people to talk to because we got them warmed up, and now they know how to self-identify and how to talk like that. I think the thing I have issues sometimes with the budgets is the question I asked you, which is about, we need to commit to kind of these events. Sales loves events. And I tell salespeople, I have no problem saying this outside. Sales loves events. And I say, you love events because you can see it. You can see it with your eyes. You can see these people here, and it's very real that you can see it happen. So therefore you want to spend all the money on events. And I was like, but the thing is, like, because if you go into your CRM and you see these people engaged, it's not the same of having like a warm conversation with somebody. And I'm like, but all these people are getting warmed up for you to have that warm conversation and to have a more focused chat and that aspect of it. So it is always that space of like, we're going to spend this much on the digital activities because the digital activities is how we get them in. And then when we have like drinks in the office, those people are ready to there, but we had to warm them up to get them to the owned event that you wanted to see, or getting them primed, or getting them, I believe, passionately in the ability for the prospect to self-educate, right? Like, so have we given them all of that storyline, education, things that they can access so that they want to come to an owned event and not just happen to be at a sponsored event that we're going to as well. And so that kind of digital versus like it's happening, trust the process budget,
right.
versus the here's the event and you can see it with your eyes and you're like, here's the thing and now I have 3 meetings, that kind of thing, versus also the long and short is kind of where that budget space is harder, I think, for me.
It's kind of interesting because you're categorizing those efforts, those initiatives. And when we're talking about this concept of a bottoms up budget,
Yeah,
you can actually create those line items by where they are in the funnel. So you can tie, brand building, for example, to awareness and preference.
okay.
And you can tie your outbound marketing and your content marketing into the consideration level, right? And so that can also help correlate the marketing activity to the sales activity so that there can be a better understanding of how each of those tactics feed into a specific business result that you're trying to drive on the, sales and customer acquisition and awareness perspective. So I think that could also be valuable for folks.
And when you're talking about like your CPA budget, the cost per acquisition, do you how long is that cycle? How long do you ask? As I was mentioning, sometimes my sales cycle is a couple of years.
Right.
Can you help give again some information into how to say, I'm going to do a CPA, and yes, it's a 2-year cycle, but you'll see it in 2 years.
Yeah. Well, until you have real data, all you can do is model it. Right. You just use your best guess that you can and say, this is how it's trending. And as you discover new data, you feed your new data into the model and see if you need to adjust up or down. But until you have that real ROI, because you've closed customers, until then you're literally just modeling it out. That's all you can do.
Which I always put as a KPI in the first year too, to be like, one of it is setting the benchmark to say, like, as I was saying, I'm like, my approach is like, we're going to do this BAU. I know who our prospect is. I believe they're in these 2 communities. So we're going to infiltrate these 2 communities. I believe this is where they are online. And then this is how we're going to make our website be the hub of all of these spaces. If you're deciding your website is the hub, right? You can make LinkedIn, whatever it is, these other communities, that hub. But it always is that aspect of we're setting it up like this. So there's definite strategy to it. There's definite space in it. But also I'm willing to say in 4 months, I'm going to pull the plug because we didn't get the number of leads I was hoping to, or the leads are too cold for right now, or sales isn't going to. The other thing we're not discussing is like there's these initiatives that you're going to do, and sales fundamentally doesn't have the time to do that. There's sometimes for the best efforts you can do, they'll be like, we're going to divide and conquer, and they're going to go deep on this, and you're going to go broad on that. And you hope that it meets in the middle. At some point, I'll be like, I'm ready for them to talk. Like there's those other spaces. So aligning that kind of thing can be difficult to say, okay, but I need you to, yes, you're going to focus on that. I'm going to warm up this community. But as soon as I see this, you need to be in here. And to be honest, if you have a good sales team, they're thirsty and you're like, here's some water, they should go over there. But it is that kind of playing like, here's the plan, here's the blueprint. Within it, there's some experimentation. Here's the experimentation. But fundamentally, I'm trying to decide. It's very much like scientific process, right?
It really is.
Hypothesis, testing methodology, experiment, learnings, conclusion. And how are we going to go through and say, this is what I've learned and this is how we know it. And actually, there's a lot there, but that particular salesperson isn't the right person for that community. And can we swap those two people? Because that's happened before as well, where, just by how accounts have been divided up isn't just right for personality if you're going into like needing less volume sales, right? There's sometimes you need 10 clients. That's it, right? And so you need to have somebody that, if you're dealing with those size revenue projects, like you need somebody, personality fit really matters.
It does matter. It does matter. I also wanted to circle back to something that you said earlier, which is in the experimentation, where you're talking about how, we believe this is going to deliver results and how you're willing to pull the plug. Having that conversation also with finance, when you're talking about the budgeting, to say, listen, if we're discovering that something's not working, I'm going to be the first one to say we need to stop it. And then making sure that you actually do that so that you can build trust with finance and they can see where, oh, great, she put the brakes on that because it wasn't working. I know that she's trying to be a good steward of our limited funds, she's being practical and appropriate about it. That can go a long way towards building the trust, because the first time that you come to them with a bottoms up budget and they're used to going top down, it's going to be awkward. There's learning, there's communication, there's all sorts of things that need to happen. But one of the fundamentals of that is trust. Do they trust that you're actually going to be a good steward of the money? And then you prove that over time through those experimentations, through being willing to put the brakes on something, through having the conversation with sales to say, hey, you know what? I think that this would work if we put Joe on it instead of Mary. And what we're learning there is it takes a certain kind of communication style. We think that, Joe really has that skill. What do you think about swapping this out? Having those kinds of very honest and frank conversations, but always with your eye towards what the business outcome is, goes a long way.
I think you can this is phrased incorrectly, but I think you can get away with a lot as long as you're aligned to the business objectives. I think most marketing loses its way. Well, I think most marketing loses its way, but I also think because we get so tied up in channels that you lose the impact. Like, as I say all of the time, one of the things I hate most is unstrung tactics.
Yes.
And I think the budgeting, when you're looking at your budget for this year, I really encourage anyone to look at your budget in a way that says, yes, we've been spending on that thing for the last 4 years, and say, but is it delivering what we want to do? Just because we've done it always, do we need to do it? Just because this is like, how can you build in some experimentation for yourself to make a bigger impact when you're looking at your budget, and not just like, this is what we spent last year? Because I think that you can get really stuck in that cycle as well. This is what we had last year. This is the more sales. Now I have this much more. And you consider like, okay, I'm just going to do the little extra crust on top into one extra thing, versus actually having the guts to say, let's rethink the whole thing, and let's really take a moment. And typically maybe it's happened in your December wash ups where you've looked at it and said, okay, that wasn't it, etc. But there are sometimes these fan favorites where you feel like you have to spend because a dotted line person likes that activity, and you'll always have that. And I also am not against spending something that makes your stakeholder really happy.
There you go.
I mean, you know what I mean? As long as you're able to communicate, like, look, we're doing this because you enjoy it, and because you can see people or whatever, it doesn't have the ROI that someone else is going to ask me for. But as long as you know that, fine, let's do it. Or fine, we're going to share that cost with another department or something like that. But I do think that it's very easy. We're talking it very like, literally bottoms up perspective or blank page perspective. And I'm not sure how often people really start with the blank page. I think it's, what did we spend last year and how do we add a little here, add a little there?
That's a shortcoming then. That's kind of taking the easy way out. I really don't recommend that for anybody. I think that you should look at each year or cycle, however the company is constructed for how they manage money. I think you should look at that fresh, because one of the things that's happened over the past decade is marketing is a performance center now, and marketing is about data, and you can now trace a lot more impact and results than we could in the past.
Right.
And, because of that, you have data coming into the marketing planning cycle that you didn't used to have. And because you have that data, it's your responsibility, honestly. It's your responsibility to make decisions based on that data, or at least in part based on that data. You might have, strategy and gut and things like that also feed into it, but you can't make it devoid of the data. And so I think being good shepherds of the company's money means that effort deserves you being analytical, and it deserves you taking the time to be thoughtful about every aspect of the budget. And especially since, we work with early stage companies. And so money matters.
Yeah.
There's not a slush fund. There's not a large amount of discretionary income where if you really miss the mark for a quarter that you can just go and grab money from another bucket and get back on track. You have to do your best to get it as close to right as you can on an ongoing basis. And I think just starting with last year's budget and adding a couple of tactics on top of it because you have an extra 50K or whatever, but to me that lacks integrity, and it's not in the best interest of the company or the performance. And it's kind of a little myopic too, because you're going to miss opportunities to do something new or exciting because you're using last year's playbook. And maybe last year's playbook is based on the playbook from the year before. You're just repeating more and more of what was perhaps mediocre. So unless it's a stellar plan and it performed for you outrageously amazingly, and you're like, okay, like I don't want to rock the boat, this is working and it's delivering tremendous business results, go for it. But that happens so seldom. There's always room for improvement. There's always ways to do things better. And I think we have to be good shepherds of the company's money and put the intellectual effort into the plan.
And I think you have to push your company to try for that experimentation or to try for that different perspective. I do a lot in an industry that is so heavily conference-based, and the amount of money spent for conferences, for stands, for things in that area. And then I might come with a digital marketing plan or a PR plan, and it adds a new channel, which I think for that particular industry is a massive opportunity because literally no one else is doing it. So you could do very little effort for seemingly a lot of return to turn on a great email nurture campaign. I just haven't seen them. And it's hard. It's really hard to say, like, is coming back and saying, why don't you give me 3% of your event budget and let's see what happens? And it's really hard for people to do that. It's very, very odd because I've to kind of come and say, this is going to open up new channels and new opportunities and new spaces and new point of view, because at the end of the day, not 100% of the people that you want to talk to are at 100% of the events that you're going to or the conferences you're going to. So we have to find them in different places beyond luck, because that's why you're doing these different marketing activities anyway. So it does take sometimes a lot to change industry perspectives of what is a good channel to experiment. And again, what it means to see somebody in your CRM getting warmed up versus seeing them in person. Yeah. You can see where my mind is at the moment. But no, it's interesting. So, I mean, thank you so much. This is we never have talked about this before. So I'm really curious, this was really interesting to hear your perspective on this. I'm having 2 key takeaways. Okay. So my 2 key takeaways is that as the marketer, as the person setting the budget, influence the market or the marketing budget, whatever, you must stay as aligned to your business objectives as possible. And some of your business objectives need to include learning. And so, whereas you've talked about experimentation, I call it, this is our learning. We're going to learn something, and we're going to learn yes or no, or middle, or it's finite budget, or messaging, or focus on this. But you can't really go wrong when you think of the business objectives for this year. And I also think for next year.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think number 2 is really the core of what you've spoken about, which is how can you build at the beginning of your budget fluidity into the needs and experimentations that you're going to need in 9 months' time that you don't know of now, can't think of now, but know that you're going to be wanting to try some other experimentation or some other activity based on the learnings you've done now. And we don't know the future. So how do you build in that fluidity and conversations with the people that you know who need to sign off to say, these things are cyclical, or this is where we'll have time to do this, or that's where this peak time for a target audience doesn't hit until that end of the year cycle, and how to build it in. So stay on your objectives with flexibility is what we're saying. I'm not sure if you have other thoughts.
Well, definitely those 2. And then I was also thinking about how when a client comes in and they engage you, Margaret, they're engaging you because they have a need. There's a business need. They're trying to achieve business outcomes. And if they're stuck with wanting to take what they did last year, even if, with or without a budget increase, that's just repeating what they've done in the past. And now there's just a new person who's doing it. And one of the things that I love about how you engage early on, you do this really immersive process where you really get to know the business and exactly what it is that they're trying to do. If everyone would do that within their own departments, because not everybody that's an audience on this episode is necessarily, an agency or a firm. They could be just an inside person running their marketing department. Think of it as if you were outside coming in. How can you get that fresh perspective and really embed in the business, and then have that feed into the plan, just as you do when you go and you engage with a new client? Because what comes out of that, it sounds like, Margaret, you wind up with new channels, new approaches, things that you think are worth testing and trying. In-house people can do that same thing and really think of it from that perspective. And so that would be my challenge to the audience, is to really think of themselves as a consultant within the business, think of themselves as a thought leader within the business, question everything, and then feed that into the plan for your next year.
I mean, I just question everything. That's what I do already, but I like it as advice.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Marg. Happy budgeting to you, or non-budgeting, as the case may be. And we're excited about this new year and these conversations. Again, if there's topics you'd like to cover, questions, praise, we'll take a lot of praise as well. Feel free to send that, and we'll hear you soon. We'll see you soon.
All right. Sounds great. I'm super excited for this season 2. And I think this is a great inaugural episode, and we'll go from here.
Amazing.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All marketing for all.